Hey everyone, it's Ryan Lizzo with TELUS News here with my weekly chat with Steve Schmidt of The Warning. Steve, one, tell us while people join the chat the latest Blue Jays news. Um, I still
Defeat.
haven't.
It was not good last night, Ryan. It was not
I didn't
good at the
watch,
Rogers
so
Center.
I'm sorry to hear that. Uh, my ignorance of what's going on in baseball will be apparent from these questions. But was a home game, away game? Did you go?
The Toronto Blue Jays have home field advantage now for the American League Pennant Series championship series against the Mariners, and it was off to a good start. First swing of the game, George Springer hits a home run, and then
Wow,
there was
that's
one
exciting.
other hit for the balance of the game. Blue Jays dropped the first of the series. Two home games in Toronto. Then there's three in Seattle. And then there are two more in Toronto if necessary. So it is a 7-game series, best of 7. Uh, Seattle beat the Detroit Tigers in a 15-inning game. One of the great baseball games, probably in the history of baseball in the playoffs. And the
Wow.
Blue
Okay.
Jays beat the Yankees. And
Well, I'll
so
always.
here we are. So we this is the American League. We're watching it play out. Saw a fight in the stands.
You saw a
Always
fight in
nice
the
to see a
stands.
fight in the stands. Got to see
What
an
was the
ejection, right? Always good to see the cops getting cheered.
what was the
As
fight over?
there were some obnoxious Seattle Mariners fans who got out of control.
How do
Got
you know?
out of control.
How can
Yeah.
you be sure? How can you be sure they were Mariners fans?
Well, there was the jerseys gave it away. It was and
Wasn't
the
your
hats.
wasn't your
It's
people?
the hats. It's like well, it's a lot like the Trump thing, right? If you were to be like, how can you be sure? I'd be like, well, it's the hat, the red hat.
So you never seen those people who wear the red hats and then they just say "made you look."
Hmm.
Doesn't actually say "Make America Great Again."
No, no.
I don't know why you would wear that, but well, while we let people join, quick update on Bodie. I know a lot of people who tune into this chat are curious. After 2 weeks at his Virginia boot camp, Bodie has returned a completely new dog.
Mhm.
I cannot tell you how disciplined, obedient, loving this puppy is after just
Mhm.
2 weeks with this guy. The guy, his name is Guy, and I don't know what they did to Bodie out there, but he's just a totally different dog. Well, I don't know if you've ever trained a dog, Steve, but it's hard to do it on your own. Sometimes you need help. And this dog is now walking next to me on the left side, complete
Mhm.
loose leash, which, before that he was pulling 100% of the time. He is not biting or eating anything. Behind this camera is the rest of the place, and Bodhi's over there on the couch. He is just sitting there, chilling out. In fact, he might be even taking a nap, not chewing, not eating anything he's not supposed to. I could put anything out here. He's no longer touching it. Um, it was like magic. So if you're having problems with your puppy and you live in the DMV area, uh, hit me up and I will tell you how to get in touch with this camp. It was total magic. 2 weeks, 2 weeks, and all he did was on leash training. Didn't even do any off leash training yet. That's going to be our next stop. We'll do a week of that. So that's probably the biggest update I have. And this is going to be very controversial, and I don't want people to get mad. But I would like to hear what people's opinions are. One thing that this trainer does use is a prong collar, and I know people who fiercely object to the prong collar. Um, I will just say it just it created an entire new disciplined, happy puppy. So, um, you ever train a dog with a prong collar?
Mm-mm.
No? Are you against it?
It like pinches the dog, right?
The idea is
Full.
the theory behind it is that it John P. Wallace in the chat says the prong collar is the best. Bridget says I couldn't do it. And I get it. I would never have been able to do it on my own. I didn't actually know that they were going to use the prong collar. I'm not sure I would have signed up if I knew that, but they did. And the idea is it gives a little bit of pinch that simulates what mom or dad would do to discipline the dog with their own teeth. Um, anyway, I knew this would set off a massive debate in the chat. Prong collar saved my dog. Uh, these collars are horrible. I know. I know. All right. I don't want to have a whole hour about this. Please, don't judge me. Bodhi is doing great. Um, a lot has happened in the last week, Steve. I would, I think, every week seems like this, but we last, what were we, last October 6th, we last met. I would say the last week since we met was probably the worst week for our democracy, maybe, top five of, our lifetimes in terms of how, now that these guys have been in power for a while, how they are, now that they've taken control, purged people from these institutions, put their own people in power, now that they are turning these institutions, unleashing them on their enemies, on democratic cities. Um, I would say it's one of the worst weeks that we've seen. Letitia James was indicted on October 9th. I just put some stuff together here so we can review the week. Obviously, Comey has his arraignment. The shutdown, we're now in, I think, day 13 with unprecedented tactics that this administration is using that previous administrations never used during a shutdown in terms of firing people, um, uh, weaponizing the probation process, all these things that OMB is all the sort of Doge tactics that should not be done during a shutdown, but they are saying are necessary. um, the courts continuing action in the courts, narrowing Trump's domestic troop deployments, and the tale has not been told on where that's going to end up. And this is all sort of ramping up to Saturday, October 18th, for the No Kings protests. So I think those protests are coming at a very, very important time. Anyway, that's what's been on my mind. But let's get into it.
Well, I mean, you have this growing danger heading into a weekend where there will be multitudes of millions of Americans on the street engaged in dissent. And that act of dissent has been labeled terrorism by a person named Stephen Miller, who has taken recently on a number of occasions to quote in Goebbels directly while expressing his hatreds for half the country. And so we see use of federal power that is shocking, is abusive, is sustained by lies. The extraordinary moment this week of Pam Bondi trying to insinuate that the assassination of Melissa Homan and the attacks on Democratic legislators in Minnesota was conducted by left-wing terrorists. And the sum total of all of the madness is coming due. And we have a couple of things happening in the country all at once. There's one, things that are occurring right now. And in that category, vividly, is the masked federal thug on a roof who pointed a weapon and fired a pepper bowl at a priest who was protesting. That's happening right now. The second thing that's that's happening is that Donald Trump is suggesting that the army will flood into America's cities because there's an insurrection underway when there is no insurrection happening anywhere, except for if you want to search for insurrections, the one that he incited in January of 2021. So you see the forces of make believe conspiring with real military force, with real guns, to put those real guns for the make believe reasons into close proximity to American citizens pointing at them. And you have a media that is run by the richest people in the world, giant corporations that are scared shitless of the administration. And the worldview that these people share is perfectly represented by Bari Weiss at CBS News, which is the great threat of our time is Greta Thunberg. And so as we come into this weekend, there is chaos in this country, and the economy day by day is worsening, while Wall Street speculators, pumped up and on by the fevered media coverage around it, are getting their last droppings before the crash comes. And it's coming. That's what the data says.
You think you're predicting an economic crash?
Absolutely. I mean, you look at everything that's happening in the American economy right now. You look at the warnings that are being made. You look at the housing market. You look at the amount of credit card late payments, foreclosures, all of those things that indicate the state of the real economy, including zero job growth. Um, Trump's Bitcoin delusions will come crashing down. I always um, the alliteration of Franklin Roosevelt in that 1936 speech where he talks about 12 years the ticker and 3 years, 9 years the bread lines. Yeah, we're in for tough days in America.
You could also add to that list of economic indicators the flight to gold, which
Yeah, yeah,
is,
yeah, yeah.
it's I think it's one of its highest value, and also to things like crypto. People are looking for safety. The Treasury Treasury Secretary, for what it's worth, also is now saying that the government shutdown is starting to hit the economy. That may or may not be true, but I assume they want to set up an argument to blame the Democrats for any economic problems in the next, in the pre-midterm period on the Democrats shutting the government down. Um, but it also could be hitting the economy for real. But you see them setting up that argument. Let's pause on the economy for a second. I want to talk about, because I don't think we can talk about it enough, is this what we have been talking about now, Steve, for months? One of the most easily predicted things that is fortunately on track is Trump's obsession with using the military in the United States and slowly, gradually pushing towards using the Insurrection Act. And I just want to think through a little bit about what this means, because I think there are a range of scenarios that are from the worst case scenario that you hear bandied about by really serious people and serious politicians from colleagues, our colleagues on Substack, to people like Gavin Newsom, that this is a predicate that will in some way undermine the midterm elections next year. And we could talk about the steps where that would happen. I think on the more optimistic range, and I can't believe that we're sitting here talking about the range of possibilities with a president declaring using the Insurrection Act. But on the more optimistic front, it would be, he uses the Insurrection Act. He sends some troops here and there, but it doesn't really have a major impact. It's mostly for show. And I think you could also see a scenario, if I'm just putting on my like bloodless political hat here, where this conflict pre-midterm elections is actually a deeply motivating factor for the anti-Trump coalition, and that it completely backfires on this administration. It's the red line that they cross, and just triggers an outpouring of anti-Trump sentiment in the midterms. You're not allowed to have uh, troops or any military near polling places in almost every state, I believe. Um, Unless we're in a place where the worst case scenario is happening, where this Insurrection Act interacts with the election machinery in a truly dictatorial way. I think that's a possibility, that this just backfires because he doesn't actually know what he's doing here, and it triggers a political backlash like we've never seen. Um, what are your Give me your take on that in terms of the range of outcomes, if we go down this path.
Um, so I go lights out, meaning I don't see into the pitch black anything beyond the rhetoric of, well, we might not have elections that you referred to with Gavin Newsom. And so I don't think that that is the case. There's no mechanism for there to not be elections. And there were elections during the Civil War, during the Second World War. So I'm going to just stipulate that Governor Newsom is right. And there's going to be, in, I guess, the best way to say this, that his speculation about the worst case scenario comes to pass. And I guess, because it's all very broad when it's stated, what he's saying is the United States Armed Forces will prevent American citizens from picking their leaders. Is that what he's saying?
I think it's vague. I think people, when they talk about this, everyone's just sort of trying to wrap their head around what this means. And I don't think he's detailed it in that way. I think generally what people mean is there's a combination of people being afraid to go to the polls, because you've created this militarized situation in some big important cities, to a much worse case scenario where there have been actual conflicts in some of these cities, and there's a government, warning, stay home.
Let's
Now,
so
obviously, we're in uncharted constitutional territory there, and you know, call me naive. I still think the courts will not allow those kinds of scenarios. But he's looking for contact. He's looking for a way to argue going into the midterms that crime is out of control, that Democrats are out of control, that Democratic cities are out of control. So even if these are minor conflicts here and there, he wants this elevated to a 24/7 thing on Fox News, and so that the Republican base is just convinced that the country's falling apart, Democrats are rioting in the cities, and Trump's the last thing, saving us, and that's why, the National Guard has been deployed, and they need a big surge of these voters who vote for Trump in the presidential elections, don't come out in midterms, but that's the political uh, uh, um, atmosphere that he's trying to create.
I I think it's perfectly stated the way that you said it. He's producing a horror show then,
Yeah,
and no more so than you're under threat at a Halloween movie. In real life, you're not under threat in Trump's horror movie. Or or you're under threat. Now, I would argue that the abuse at the Department of Justice of any American means that every American is under threat. That's how I see it. When I see Donald Trump saying we have to use the Insurrection Act, it's a pretext for the abuse of power, but there is no underlying reason as a matter of reality to use the military in the cities. So it's an imaginary Reichstag fire, and there are tremendous implications involved with that. But again, and I'm not trying to make any point for sake of an argument. I'm just trying to, for understanding, because I think it's key to narrowing in on the management of fear and anxiety for a lot of people. But if I understand your position, what you articulated, what you're saying is he's going to do everything he can to create as much fear and terror using every element of his presidential power, which will include the deployment of the military, really as street theater
hmm
to incite his base. And we know he's good at that because he got at least a couple thousand people to attack the Capitol. What I hear Gavin Newsom saying is something different than that. And the point that I hear you two sharing in common where it comes together at its closest point is when Newsom says or insinuates they're going to stop an election. And you say you could imagine a scenario as you laid it out hypothetically. And I'm not trying to impose a position on you at all. And I think it's very rational and could see happening. But when you say that the government would say it's too dangerous to go outside, don't go vote, which I think is the same as saying don't go vote at the point of a gun. And so if that were to happen, I don't think that I want to be the first person to articulate, right, what comes next. Right. But I think Governor Newsom should, because she's the governor of California and he's going to run for president. But if I understand the position, if you're asking me, do I think that Donald Trump will abuse his power to create theater? 100%. If you say, and I think you'd have to be nuts to say that it's not possible, or that
Yeah.
Stephen Miller hasn't thought about it. But Gavin Newsom has insinuated it closely enough that a point of clarification. And I'm not trying to stir the pot or trouble. Or are you suggesting that it's possible that Donald Trump would say no elections? I got it from here on out. Because if you're saying that, we have a very bleak future and a very violent one.
And let me just clarify because I want to be clear about what Newsom said. In my quick search here, he said two things. One, he's talked about how the 2026 elections that Trump is trying to rig them, right? And I think we know what he's talking about there, specifically with the redistricting efforts in Texas and all the stuff that led Newsom to try and check that with the redistricting in California.
And I think that's fair. I think that's a fair
That's
use
fair.
of the word rigging, right? That's a spot on description of what Trump is trying to do.
Yeah. When he was on Colbert in late September, he said, "I fear that we will not have an election in 2028. I really mean that in the core of my soul, unless we wake up to the code red, what's happening in this country, and we wake up soberly to how serious this moment is." And I think
Okay.
there he's talking about a long range, if things continue on the path they are now, he didn't spell out exactly how this is going to happen. He was warning about the erosion of our democracy, the authoritarian tendencies of this administration, and a Republican Congress who has no interest
Well,
in checking it. And so I think he's just sort of taking the long view and saying if things don't,
what he
uh,
said, what
yeah,
he said there, right? I mean, read it again.
I fear that we will not have an election in 2028. I
Okay.
really mean that.
I mean,
That so
we've had we've
that's as
had
serious as you get.
we've had an election, right? Nonstop, continuously since 1792 forward.
Yep.
And this is the cornerstone of the American civilization. Uh, Clearly, and I'm not endorsing anybody here, but there are two Democrats in the country. Uh, One is named Gavin Newsom, and the other is named J.B. Pritzker, that are engaged at the front, and I think spot on in almost every instance. But what my main point here, and this is not to be confused as a criticism of Governor Newsom. That's not what I'm doing. What if Governor Newsom is correct about that fear? He shared that fear. He's not a demagogue. Gavin Newsom is a serious political leader. And I believe that is a legitimate fear that he has. Right. So I'm gonna meet
Yeah.
that fear head on where he stated it and about what he stated it over. If that were to happen somehow, the issue isn't we're not having an election. The issue is what we're going to be having instead of the election, which is a civil war. That's what happens.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
I have
And
to say, yeah, good.
so there are things that are not talked about, but we've come to the edge beyond which, by not talking about these things, we stop a conversation that has run out of room to be able to make sense absent talking about those things because, and Abraham Lincoln talked about this. In 1864, consequence of losing the election would have been the election of George McClellan, and it would have meant the partition of the United States. The North, the Union, the United States would have sought a peace agreement, and there would have been a fourth country on the North American continent, a slave empire. And so it wasn't that Lincoln said the stakes are so high, when in fact the vote was a decision of the people to permit the unimaginable, the dissolution of the country. That's what the election was about. We held the election. There is nothing that permits the cancellation, the
Right.
postponement of a presidential election. Not World War, not Civil War, not Great Depression, not terror attack, not plague, not flu, not fucking asteroid strike. Nothing. And so
Yeah.
when the most important leaders of the Democratic Party, who are serious people, share that fear should be discussed in a serious way. And if you think about this in the analogy of an airplane that takes off and lands somewhere, what Governor Newsom is saying, well, there's an event that could happen, like the plane taking off from Dulles and landing in Sacramento, and the destination would mean we wouldn't have an election. That's not what would happen. That's not the destination for not having an election. There are 350 million people in the United States. And you have an administration that dares to suggest that 10 million people peacefully on the streets are terrorists? While the leaders of the opposition think that maybe we won't have an election? Come on.
No, it's terrifying. And combine that with the two things that have happened in the last month, or three things that have happened in the last month. Um, to this rhetoric doesn't just seem like rhetoric. Trump says a lot of crazy shit. So 50% of it you can ignore, but a lot of it you can't ignore, and is as serious as a heart attack. And so when you have, well, I still, am hung up on this. I can't believe people aren't talking about it every day. When you have ICE agents descending from helicopters in a city in Chicago and rounding up free Americans in an apartment building one by one, tying naked kids and leaving them for hours so they can enforce a civil crime, overstaying a visa, crossing the border. It's a civil crime. Think of how many other civil crimes there are. Imagine if they were enforced this way. That happened in Chicago. No oversight. Congress is doing nothing. Nobody is lifting a finger to investigate what the hell happened there. That's the first thing. They,
Why do you think J.B. Pritzker has not called the Illinois legislature into special session to investigate it?
I don't know. There's a failure of imagination with some of these elected officials who want to just do things the way that they've always been done. I think Pritzker in general has been, very good and said all the right things. I don't know on that specific question, but let me just add one other thing. The thing, I'm not a big like, oh, there's going to be a civil war guy, but one thing that if this were another country and it happened, you would probably think, huh, that looks like a country that's in the early stages of a civil war. The governor of Texas, watching the president want to send troops all over into all of these cities, lent the president affirmatively hundreds of his Texas National Guardsmen that he knew the president would then use to go into Chicago, Portland, wherever the hell he wanted, against the wishes of the leaders of those states. Think about if this was happening in, country X, and you had two states and a federal system, and one of those states is lending troops to the head of the federal system to go and invade the other states' cities. You would say that is an early sign of a couple of states that might one day be at war with each other. Do I think that's going to happen here? No, but I can't remember anything like that in a very, very long time where you've got those kind of games going on between governors. I know governors in blue states and red states can compete on all kinds of things, but I've never heard of one governor lending troops to the president so he can go and invade another governor's city against his wishes. So that's the second thing that happened recently that is a big flashing warning sign that things are not going in the right direction.
So, completely agree. I talked about this a year ago that this would be the Rubicon, the deployment of federalized troops from red states into blue states as a type of occupying retribution force, a reverse reconstruction, if you will, right? And then it should not be lost that the provisioning states or southern states or Confederate states that are sending their National Guard federalized into cities with large black populations. That should not be lost in the context of American history at all. And so I want to talk about the consequences of that. How I think that there's a couple of ways that this will play out. So first, I think there's going to be a Democratic Congress, and second, there will be some type of disaster that befalls Texas that will require a federal appropriation. And the reality is, so Texas voters get the message regarding what's been done in their name is that every member of the Illinois delegation, the California delegation, and every state where this bullshit goes on should vote no and shed no tears for it. That'll be on the leaders of Texas. It's a rich state. They can pay. The second thing is I'm a frequent flyer, as you know, though I travel less than I did. I'm a million miler on three different airlines. And all of those airlines give veterans and active duty the courtesy of boarding first. And there's a picture in Illinois of a masked National Guardsman who's now no longer dressed in uniform like an American soldier, but like one of Saddam's Fedayeen or a Venezuelan militia. He's now got the face mask on. And so I just wonder, as a Delta frequent flyer, right? Do I have to, if I live in Portland, right? Do I have to give the boarding courtesy to the person who's pointing a gun at me, right? If I wear a frog pop costume, and so what's going to happen over the Trump presidency is the American people are going to lose their affection for their military, for the United States Army in particular. And one of the things that the country needs militarily against China is we need a much bigger Navy. And we need a larger Marine Corps. But I could see absolutely coming out of the Trump presidency a much smaller army. And if Donald Trump deploys units like the 82nd Airborne into America's cities, the consequence will be that unit's colors will be sheathed. Uh, Unit will be disbanded. It's a historically significant unit, one of the most valorous in the history of the United States Army. But if it's turned against the American people in the way that Trump is suggesting, and the next president, those colors will be sheathed. There'll be no more 82nd Airborne or 101st Airborne. There's been lots of units that have extinguished and expired, whose colors hang in museums. We need a bigger Marine Corps. We need a lot more ships. Maybe America's deterrent will be submarines, but an army that cannot be trusted, led by officers who are faithless to the Constitution, who are keen to point weapons on behalf of their political faction and can't wait to get off duty to put their red MAGA hats on. We have no use for that, no need for that. General Marshall would have been the first person to call for the disbandment of that. So we have to talk in this country about the militarization for law enforcement agencies, right? And you see the true colors,
Well, yeah,
right? Of
and
too many people at first instance, right? The drawing of guns on people, the shooting of the priest in the head. It's unacceptable.
no, you're absolutely right about the loss of respect that goes along with misusing the military or troops. You remember the debate in the Democratic Party over abolish ICE, and how a lot of young leftist activists pushed that on Democratic leaders a while back. There was a big debate about the wisdom of that. I think most people, once the dust settled, thought it was a bad idea, a bad slogan. Um, Donald Trump comes back into power, and what he's doing with ICE is completely discrediting these federal agents in the minds of a lot of Americans. I don't think people would have the view, the negative view of the whole abolish ICE movement right now. I don't know if abolish is the right word, but he's completely destroyed the reputation of that agency. And I see what you're saying in terms of what could happen with the military. And just to go back to something else you said, Steve. Just because Donald Trump has is an idiot and can't focus on anything for very long, there's always this sort of debate in his circle between the operatives, true believers, people who actually now have mastered the bureaucracy, and him. He only sees things as television productions. He only sees things as, for show. He doesn't actually care about results. And so, this goes back to what we were talking about with what's the end game here with sending troops to these different cities. Does it have an end game? Is it something he's thought through, or is it just a spectacle he wants to create because he thinks the politics will, it'll split the country in half, and he'll have the bigger half going into the midterms. That's probably his view on most things, right? But then there are people like Stephen Miller who want to operationalize these things, who do think more strategically and further down the line, and want more serious control over the or more use of the military in these cities, and have, I think, insidious goals in mind. And you can't be too cynical about what they are thinking. Same thing with the sort of doging of the federal government. You had Trump and Elon Musk that were, sort of simpatico in the sense that they just do things for show and for shit posting, on social media. But then you have Russ Voigt and his, army of aides in the OMB who are extremely serious about this stuff and are, taking extreme measures to fire as many people in the government as they can. And sometimes, when the politics get bad for Trump, he'll step in and say no. Um, I've one of my reporter on the Trump beat that I trust more than anyone once said to me, as crazy as it sounds, the moderating force when it comes to immigration in the White House is Donald Trump. Talking about the fights between Miller and Trump on that issue, and I don't, and I'm, and I believe that. So that's why it's important to sort of understand the henchmen below him who are trying to all competing for his approval and scheming and competing and sort of I don't love the Nazi analogies always, but there's a biography of Hitler. I'm forgetting the historian's name, who he coined a term to explain the structure of Nazis below Hitler. And the term he used, as these guys jockeyed for position and for more extreme ideas, was moving towards the Fuhrer. And it was just as I described. It was coming up with schemes that you believed Hitler wanted implemented. The Fuhrer himself may have never thought of this, didn't understand the system well enough to come up with the idea, but it was this constant competition with the between the henchmen with coming up with the craziest ideas, and eventually you get the Holocaust. And I'm not saying what we're witnessing is like the most extreme versions of Nazism, obviously, but there are parallels in these authoritarian systems when you have a leader who's not without well-defined specific operational ideas, but a lot of um, moods and hatred for foreigners mixed in with racism and misogyny. And so then the henchmen come up with ideas to sort of implement, those Trumpian moods. And I think that's one way that I think about this administration, and why you have to watch people like Miller and Vance and their jockeying.
All of the top Nazis hated one another. They were all fierce rivals, and proved the proposition that nothing drives contempt like proximity in politics. And I think there's so much talk about how broken our education system is and civics, and I certainly agree with that. But the curriculum in terms of I
Wait,
think
Steve, just I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to make an important correction because I hate to get this wrong. Working towards the Fuhrer, not moving towards the Fuhrer. And the historian is Ian Kershaw. If anyone wants to read a great 2-volume history or biography of Hitler, check out Ian Kershaw's book. Sorry, go ahead.
and the curriculum, the most momentous events in the history of human civilization is what occurred during the Second World War, and it's the foundation of the world we live in today. And appreciating and understanding how it happened and why it happened is, I think, important for human survival. But beyond that, figuring out what the core lesson is. And to me, a big part of the core lesson has always been an appreciation for how next happened, and next, and next, and next. And I've told this story before on these things. I'm not sure with you together, on one of ours, but I had the experience of going to Auschwitz last March, and I had a guide who was the chief guide, took Musk around a couple weeks earlier, and we're sitting in this corner of Auschwitz, and he points at some buildings and he says, "Do you know what type of buildings those are?" And I said, "Yeah, those are sewage treatment buildings." And he goes, "That's right." And he said, "The killing got off to a late start at Auschwitz." And I said, I did not know that. And Auschwitz Birkenau was part of the Operation Reinhardt camps, the death camps, where the Jews were to be exterminated. And he says, yeah, he says, when Auschwitz was opened, the SS needed to get a building permit. They were not omniscient, were not all powerful. ICE, if it wants to build a facility, will have to go and get building permits. And the SS went to get a permit for the camp plans, which was a prison for 100,000 people in Poland in the woods. And no one said, why are we building a prison for 100,000 people in the woods in Poland? Turned out to be a lot more. What the water bureaucrat said is, well, where are you going to dump the wastewater? And the SS said, in the river. And the water bureaucrat in the Reich said, no, because there's 5 million Germans downriver. You'll poison them. And so the SS man went back and said, they said 9. And they came back with another plan. And the water bureaucrat said 9. And then my guy pulls out of his pocket the document with the stamp that opened up Auschwitz. And that stamp that opened up Auschwitz was a stamp by a water bureaucrat approving the wastewater treatment facility. And there's deep meaning in that. Appreciating in this moment is that if I see someone on the roof and that man with a mask points a weapon with a pepper ball and fires it at an unarmed priest and hits him in the head. Who wants to make the argument to me that the man who fired that wouldn't love to have a real round in the chamber and watch his head explode? Right? And so what we see every day is a bunch of unfit people mentally fumbling with their weapons, indiscriminately pointing them. And everything that Donald Trump is doing is moving young men in uniform with military weapons into close proximity with peaceful protesters while telling those young men, it's mostly young men, some women too, that the people they're facing are their enemies.
Yep.
That's what's happening in America.
And these are people who, given everything Trump has said and the actions he's taken, can 99% be sure that there will be zero consequences for their actions. They might be pardoned. They might be celebrated one day. And this is not, you don't have to, make this stuff up. He already did it with the January 6th rioters. And so you have these militarized agents in these cities with that in their back pocket, knowing that at the end of the day, there are no consequences because Trump will pardon them. They will become heroes on the right. A narrative will develop that they were actually the victims. That to me is one of the scariest parts of this coming conflict that we all fear as more and more troops get sent to cities, is that the normal, I mean, soldiers and, especially since Vietnam, American soldiers in every war have lived with the understanding that the rules of war apply. Obviously, there have been plenty of war crimes since then, but JAG officers matter. The international law matters. And most uh, police enforcement in this country has some sense that there can be consequences. Obviously, there are a lot in recent history that cross the line, but add to the fact that the average young man who is signing up to be an ICE agent these days is obviously a Trump fan, is clearly simpatico with MAGA, because who the fuck else is going to join ICE right now? And you throw in the fact that they know the president of the United States has said, do whatever you want, and that he has a history of pardoning anyone that does something on his behalf. And you have just taken away the most important deterrent that these guys in these cities have in terms of crossing the line and doing something horrible. And it's by design.
100%. But let me also add, if you're dumb enough to believe that you're going to be able to go kill people and abuse the shit out of them because Trump is going to pardon you, you're definitely not bright enough to hold a badge and a weapon and be a federal agent. And that at the core is the problem. Is we have these thugs and miscreants that are now suddenly made federal agents who are abusing their power coast to coast, but it's not going to last and it won't endure. And anybody who thinks they're going to be immunized by Trump for this is thinking incorrectly. The frustrating thing about it is that Donald Trump has a point of view about his power, and it's absolute, it's maximalist. And it requires Democrats to wake up. If you're the governor of a state, you have substantial power. Illinois legislatures are a powerful legislative body, and they have investigative power. They have subpoena power. There is a lot of things that the governors can be doing that they need to be doing that they are not doing. And there should absolutely be a convening of a special session of the Illinois legislature to investigate the shooting of a priest from a building in the land of Lincoln on the orders of some MAGA thug somewhere in the chain of command between Donald Trump and the guy who pulled the trigger.
100%. 100%. I agree. All right, Steve, it's 101. Let's end it there.
Good to see you,
Saturday,
Ryan.
Saturday the 18th is the No King's Day protest.
Get out there and
back.
protest, everybody. Absolutely.
We'll be back on Monday. I assume you're going to be doing some coverage on Saturday for the
Yeah,
protest. You
sure
have
will.
things planned.
Well,
All right,
yeah.
let's talk offline about doing something together, and then we'll be back here Monday at noon. Good seeing you, man. Thanks everyone
Good
for
to see you,
joining
Ryan.
us.
Take
Please
care.
subscribe.